There's tape across the doors. There's very little activity here, very little movement, very few employees. And there's still no word from officials here on when the airport will reopen, whether they'll go along with the 11 a.m. Timeline. Delta, which is headquartered here, says later today they will decide when to resume their flights. We can show you some live pictures now of planes on the tarmac. They have been there since Tuesday. Meanwhile, officials here are implementing new security measures mandated by the FAA. I can tell you that on Tuesday, police officers and bomb-sniffing dogs combed every inch, they said every inch of this airport. Additional federal marshals, customs, and border patrol agents assigned to Hartsfield should be arriving today, we're told, as they have been dispatched to major airports across the nation. This is certainly a major airport. There has been a perennial battle with O'Hare International over the bragging rights to the title for world's busiest airport. Now, Atlanta Police Department says they have also permanently assigned additional officers to this airport, although Hartsfield already has a very sophisticated, what they call, multi-layered security system. Most of this was put in place prior to the '96 Olympics held here in Atlanta. Additionally, last year, some very high-tech electronic scanning devices were installed in the concourses. As for stranded passengers, well, the number is undisclosed. Some of them were stranded as they were coming through Atlanta, major hub, in the midst of changing planes. Others were stranded when their flights aimed for another destination were stopped here. So those passengers, along with employees, are awaiting word as to when flights will resume here at Hartsfield. I'm Bonnie Anderson, CNN, reporting live from Atlanta.
All right, thank you very much, Bonnie. Our continuing coverage, America Under Attack, will resume in just one moment.
This is CNN.
This is what the southern part of New York City looks like today. What we can't capture with this picture, of course, is what this place smells like today. The winds have shifted here, blowing stinging smoke miles away from the crash site at the World Trade Center. The rescue work continues with some grim reminders of what the reality is today. The medical examiner confirming he now has 5,000 body bags in his premises, with another 5,000 body bags ordered and on the way. But rescue workers certainly are not giving up hope of finding more victims trapped in the rubble of the World Trade Center. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paula Zahn reporting for CNN from New York City this morning. And Miles O'Brien will be joining us from Atlanta in a moment. But first, I'm going to check in with Eileen O'Connor, who gave us some fascinating new information just about an hour ago on where the investigation is going now. Eileen, if you want to recap some of that and tell us anything new you've learned, we'd appreciate that.
Well, we have learned that some new information about the Bukhari brothers, but let's first start in Germany, in Hamburg. German police tell CNN they have detained a male airport worker and have brought in a woman for questioning in connection with Tuesday's attack. Now, federal law enforcement in the United States was led to this Hamburg connection by way of information that was gleaned from a car seized at Logan Airport. It was a Mitsubishi, and it was rented by Mohammed Atta, who was, and inside that was a flight manual, an Arabic language manual that sources say was very helpful. Also seized, Atta's driving records indicated that he lived here at 10,001 West Atlantic Boulevard in Coral Springs. We have some video of that apartment. Sources say that all of this information was very helpful. They also interviewed a man named Charles Voss, who housed Atta, and another man, Marwan al-Sheikhi. Charles Voss says that they attended this. Let's hear from him.
They arrived over there a year ago. It was in last July, and when they first arrived, they had no place to stay. They just popped in pretty much, as I recall, unannounced, and so we provided them for the benefit of the flight school provided them a place to stay for a few days.
Now, Huffman, now these two men attended a flight school, Huffman Aviation International. The director of that school says that FBI took records from the school on these two and other students. He also says that these two students attended the school from July to November of last year, and that after that flight school, they went to another. This shows great planning, Paula. Law enforcement sources say they believe these two men flew one of the two planes from Logan Airport. Remember, their connection was to that car at Logan Airport. The United or the American flight were the ones that flew out of Logan. They flew into the World Trade Center. Both of these men had pilot licenses that we have obtained copies of. The men carried passports from the United Arab Emirates, but officials in that country denied that they are citizens. Now, in addition, there was information gleaned from a car, a rental car, that was impounded in the Portland, Maine airport. This led police to two other brothers, Adnan Bukhari and Amir Bukhari, and also a neighbor. CNN's Susan Candiotti went inside Adnan Bukhari's house. The FBI documents left inside that house indicated, this is Adnan Bukhari, inside that house, those FBI documents indicated that federal authorities took computer records, credit card receipts, and other INS documents. Now, also next door to Mr. Bukhari lived another man that police believe could also have been one of the pilots. One of the things that the FBI said that they took was a rooms-to-go receipt. That actually indicated that Bukhari had, in fact, bought some furniture at Rooms to Go on Tuesday. So it may well be, while law enforcement had thought that he might have been one of the men, Adnan Bukhari, who flew the plane out of Logan, coming in from Portland, they now believe that perhaps he is not and is still at large. They will be seeking him, of course, as a material witness. They did take that receipt from Rooms to Go, and Susan Scandiotti has been in touch. Apparently, the Rooms to Go salesman got in touch with her, said he has spoken to the FBI, and they indicated that perhaps they are already in touch with Mr. Bukhari. He said that furniture was supposed to be sent to the port in Fort Lauderdale for shipment back to Saudi Arabia. Paula?
All right, Eileen, I know that you were busy working your contacts when I was interviewing Attorney General Ashcroft just about a half hour ago, and I asked him a question about a report in Time magazine this morning confirming the fact that at least 4 terrorist teams, and you've indicated this too, had a certified pilot with them, and that some of these pilots had flown for an airline in Saudi Arabia. And I asked him if those pilots were trained in the United States and Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia, and he wouldn't answer that. Explain to us this morning why that is so sensitive.
Well, it is sensitive because, of course, they're also in touch with the Saudi government. Now, of course, you know that Osama bin Laden is originally a Saudi national. They would have to be checking what links there are to Saudi Arabia, but also perhaps to Saudi nationals that might be linked to Osama bin Laden. Now, our records also that we've obtained do indicate that the two men, Adnan and Amir Bukhari, those two brothers that you saw earlier, the pictures of, those two men did indicate that they had a post office box in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and that it was a post office box with Saudi Airlines. They also described themselves to neighbors that we have spoken to as Saudi pilots, and we do know that they did receive training here in the United States in Vero Beach at Flight Safety International. FBI have been to Flight Safety International, and they are, of course, looking into them and to others that may have trained there. Also, Paula, they are looking into men connected with these men. They're looking through all of these records. And I am told by a law enforcement source that they are also looking at some other flight schools in Florida. So they believe that there are, of course, other pilots out there that would have flown those 2 airliners from Dulles and also from Newark. And they may all be connected. Paula?
The other piece of information that CNN has gotten that the Attorney General wouldn't comment on is something that you and I talked about in the last hour, which is the possibility that members of each of these hijacking teams may not even have known each other prior to commandeering the jet. I guess part of the motivation for that would be if they were to be captured or interrogated, they wouldn't have to betray the whole operation. Any new information on that?
No, my sources are just indicating that they are working increasingly under the indication that that is likely the case, that the pilots may well have known each other. Then probably there were 2 pilots for each of those flights, may well have known each other, but then they wouldn't have known the other 3, and the other 3 wouldn't necessarily have known the pilots or even each other, but that there was some kind of overt signal they all followed.
All right, Eileen, thanks so much for that update. We're going to head back to Atlanta, where Miles is standing by. Miles?
Paula, a little bit of breaking news coming into us just now. An Amtrak train and a freight train have collided just within about 45 minutes, about an hour ago, in Utah, in western Utah, in Tuella County. Tuella County Sheriff's Office indicating that the collision occurred and that there were, according to our affiliate there, KSL, 200 to 300 passengers on board that Amtrak train. There are reports, according to KSL, that at least 1 or 2 of those Amtrak cars is on fire. We are obviously trying to button this up, get some details for you as quickly as they become available. Just to recap, at 7:15 Eastern Time, 5:15 local time, an Amtrak train and a freight train collided in western Utah in Wendover. The county is Tuella County. The authorities there are responding to the scene there. 200 to 300 passengers on board that Amtrak train. We are working diligently to get details for you as soon as they become available. Send it back to Paula in New York.
For guests. All right, we're back here in New York City, and one of the things I think the nation is fascinated by right now is exactly what rescue workers are up against downtown as they try to start to dig through the tons and tons of rubble. Behind my shoulder, of course, you still see smoke coming from that area. Not far from there is Martin Savage, one of our correspondents, who's going to give us an update now on exactly what is going on down there. Martin?
Morning to you, Paula. And as you see quite clearly on the Manhattan skyline, it is still that plume of smoke that continues to rise where once the Twin Towers were rising themselves into the sky. It continues to be that sort of grayish white type cloud. It is fire that is still down there and smoke that is billowing up. The wind has shifted somewhat. That has eased the burden on the rescuers down there, but it has made it problematic for other people in lower Manhattan. Anyone with respiratory problems in the area are said that they should close their windows and should not come down here. As for the rescuers themselves, we were watching as a fresh load of rescuers came into the area. They're riding in buses. They're sometimes riding on the backs of trucks, any mode of transportation that can bring them down the West Highway here to approach to the Twin Towers, or what remains of where the Twin Towers once stood. Here is the problem that they're up against. There are at least 2 buildings in the immediate area around the debris field here that are said to be in imminent danger of potential collapse. We had a partial collapse that took place yesterday afternoon of the 7 remaining stories of one of those grand towers, and there is at least 2 other buildings. One is the Liberty 1 area, and then there is another building that is known as Building 5. That is a problem, obviously, for the rescuers down there. They had to evacuate quite suddenly, quite quickly. It was almost a repeat of some of the scenes we had seen days before. They are carefully working their way through that debris. They're using shovels, they're using picks, they're using heavy earth-moving equipment, and at times they're using their bare hands. The daylight now has supplanted the floodlights that bathe the area throughout the nighttime hours. They are searching for life, but many of them know that they are preparing to find death. As you point out, the number of body bags now requested by the city of New York has doubled to about 10,000. They have officially now found 160 bodies, but of course that death toll is going to go way beyond those numbers that have been found. So the desperate work is continuing. They are bringing in more equipment and they are taking out more debris. But they also know that with each passing hour and literally each passing moment, hope of finding more survivors grows dimmer and dimmer, but that hope still exists. Paula?
Martin, there was a lot of talk yesterday by FEMA and by other organizations across the country talking about sending in these specialized urban rescue teams. Can you give us an idea this morning on exactly how they are adding to the efforts already underway down there?
Well, the specialized teams obviously do the heavy lifting as far as trying to find those that may still be trapped inside. They're the ones that are dispatched to any indication if there is life to be heard from down underground. They're the ones that have the training, they're the ones that have the equipment and the expertise. The other volunteers that come in are doing also the heavy work, helping to clear the debris so that the specialized teams can have access to these specific areas. There are also a lot of firefighters that are down there doing their job, also assisting these teams. So basically, it is those teams that are working at the point when it comes to trying to find survivors. It is the many thousands of other volunteers that are doing the heavy work of trying to clear the way for them to do their job. Paula?
I know Americans stand in awe of these rescue workers and firefighters and police, all of whom are risking their lives to assist in this effort. But what are and I know none of these folks involved will ever admit the grave dangers they're facing, but today, what is the biggest challenge they face in terms of their own personal safety?
It's the shifting debris. It is the concern about the buildings in the surrounding area that are known to be buckling. We know that the fires have weakened them severely, and that is the greatest danger. But they go about the job of digging into the ground, even though the threat may be above their heads. They are concerned about finding anyone who is alive. They are leaving it up to the other experts in the area to sort of watch over them. The tremendous strain that is building up on these rescuers is very evident as you talk to all of them. You talk to some of the first responding firefighters, and the tales that they tell you of the destruction, of the human destruction that they found, are just mind-numbing. They said that they never expected to see some of the scenes that they came across. One firefighter saying that when they initially entered one of the towers, they had to obviously go in through the lobby. What they saw goes beyond human decency to describe, but there was a tremendous number of burned victims on the ground floor. That initially surprised them. They expected to find the burned victims up where the two planes impacted. Instead, what they found was that the fuel and the fire from those aircraft immediately dumped down the elevator shafts and exploded into the lobbies. That's the sort of thing they're up against, Paula.
Cannot even imagine of what they face. Martin Savage, thanks so much for that update. We're going to come back to you a little bit later on in this morning. Joining me right here, north of where Martin was just talking from, is Ron Saladino, who works for Solomon Smith Barney.
Yes.
Welcome. Tell us where you were when both of the World Trade Centers were struck.
I was on the 28th floor of number 7 World Trade, working in the southeastern corner.
Okay, now for folks who aren't familiar with New York, building number 7, or number 7, was in fact the building that collapsed much later in the day.
Yes, around 6 yesterday evening.
Did you see either one of these planes slamming into the North Tower or South Tower?
No, I didn't see any of the planes.
What did you hear?
At around 8:40, you heard a tremendous explosion, followed by what felt like an earthquake rumble. After that, immediately we looked towards the southern window and saw debris of building parts, glass, and metal shattered to the ground.
And what did you do?
At first, I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I had maybe one breath of air in the whole action. Dashed to the window, looked up, and saw a hole as wide as the World Trade Center, about 20 to 30 stories high, with flames pouring out of every end.
Everybody has had a different description of then, how they reacted to that. Did you think you were doomed?
At that point, I didn't know what to think. I was scared for my life. It's something you hear about in other countries, but you don't really know what it feels like till it actually happens, in the city you work and in the building right next to yours.
So tell us what happened from that point on.
From that point on, everyone seemed to be in awe, just staring at the giant hole in the Northern World Trade Center. We seemed to see bodies fly out of the window minute after minute in free fall, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 seconds down to the death at the bottom.
Some of those folks were jumping from the windows because they were trapped. Some of them just forced out by the pressure of the explosion.
Mm-hmm.
So you're watching this from the window. You're
absolutely.
Not thinking, I'm going to get out of this building because this building, if one of these other ones collapses, is going to be a gun or two.
Mm-hmm. At first,
are you surprised that you stood there and watched this thing rather than say, hey, I'm getting out of here?
Well, looking back at it now, it was just a blur in my memory. Eventually, someone did say, let's evacuate and let's get downstairs. And initially, once that clicked in my head, I knew to, run to the stairs and run downstairs as quickly as possible.
How long did it take you to get out of your building?
About 2 minutes. I must have ran down the stairs as fast as possible.
Yeah, we need to explain that building was only how many stories?
48, I think, in total, maybe 47.
Say only. I mean, that's a massive building by anybody's standards anywhere else in the United States. But the other buildings dwarfed it. They were 107 stories. The most remarkable thing is hearing some of your colleagues across the street describing trying to get out of the North Tower and it taking over an hour to get out.
Yes.
Once you got to the street, what happened? Were you pelted with flying debris?
Well, initially when I got down to the ground floor, the second plane had hit the Southern World Trade Center. And again, people started to panic, people started to cry, people started to get away from the front lobby windows. After that, security guards then pushed people down the escalator, around the back entrance and up towards Greenwich Street, getting people as north as possible away from the incident.
And once again, a lot of folks might not be familiar with the geography of the city, but once you arrived at Greenwich Street, which is not too far from there, did you see either one of the buildings collapse?
Yes, I did. About 10 to 20 blocks up, I stopped to catch my breath. I turned and looked around. The Southern World Trade Center began to just buckle, about 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall. And after that, there was chaos in the streets. People didn't know what to believe.
Were people screaming?
People were crying. People were saying the city's under attack. People were mentioning that the Pentagon got hit by a plane also. I mean, that's when I almost started to get really upset.
You know what is fascinating to me is one of our previous guests was describing trying to get out from the midsection of the North Tower, and he said people were quite orderly. I mean, some of whom had been through the '93 World Trade Center bombing. That there was not a sense of panic until they got to the lower floors. And Martin Savage was just reporting about all the kerosene that firefighters were surprised to burn a number of victims on the lower floors, but they were inundated with water. A lot of the sprinklers have gone on the building, and that was the point at which I think people realized they were in trouble. Martin, I'm going to ask you to assist me here. This is really quite stunning to share with folks that are joining us right now. These are pieces of paper from Cantor Fitzgerald, which I'm going to have you hold this from the brokerage firm. Singed, I don't know if the camera could pick this up, but singed pieces of paper that were blown out of the wreckage of the World Trade Center. And these actually showed up in the yard of one of our correspondents, Peter Stiles. I am told out in Brooklyn. So this stuff ended up miles and miles away. What do you know about the safety of any of your friends that have worked in the other two buildings? Are you missing friends at this point, missing colleagues?
As of now, I had no friends or coworkers who worked in number 1 and 2. There actually was an individual who worked on my floor that was hurt. He actually fell and broke his leg, but I found out that he's safe and okay with family and friends. So everyone else who I know of is safe.
You're a very lucky man, and I hope that ultimately you can erase some of these horrific images that you've shared with us this morning. Thank you, Ron Saladino.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Time to go back to Atlanta. Miles is standing by with some more news.
All right, thank you very much, Paula. Let's turn our sights on Washington for a little bit. The U.S. Capitol. Minority Leader Dick Gephardt is standing by to talk a little bit about what's ahead in Congress as the discussion shifts to some tough talk, the possibility of retaliation. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Gephardt.
Thank you.
All right, first of all, give us a sense of the debate over any sort of resolution and the wording of a resolution. I hesitate to call it a declaration of war. I presume you would too. What would you call it?
Well, I think it's an authorization for the president to do what is necessary to both find and punish the perpetrators of this violence and to try to prevent other acts from happening in the future. The president is asking for authority, and I think the president will get proper authority. We're going to be talking to his people today about how to word it properly, but I think it is needed and it will be done.
These are the sorts of occasions when partisan rancor is put to the side, but nevertheless, there are some people who, with good intentions, could have some debate about how to phrase this resolution. What are the substantive issues which may divide the parties on this?
Well, there are all kinds of arcane issues about how to word it, but essentially I don't think it's going to be a problem. Look, this was the worst violence on our soil by a foreign influence or power in the history of the country. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This country is united today. The Congress is united. There is no air or light between Democrats and Republicans, between the Congress and the president. We want to respond. This was an act against humanity, against civilization, against all Americans. And America, as it always has, will respond. We are moved by what the heroic, patriotic people are doing, sifting through this wreckage, trying to find people. We have all kinds of reports of heroism and courage, and America will stand behind our people and stand behind the entire world order.
You know, you mentioned a foreign power is the cause of it. You would have to go back to the Civil War to find greater loss of life on the U.S. soil, which leads one to believe, of course, if we can recover from the Civil War, we can well recover from this. Let's talk about short-term for just a moment. There is talk of an emergency spending resolution, perhaps on the order of $20 billion. This comes right on the heels of a discussion about the budget and some concerns about tapping into Social Security, for example. Is there some concern that this whole issue might change the whole tenor of a budget discussion in the future?
Well, I really think this is a special exception. This is a national emergency. This is a national crisis. And we cannot worry about what the budgetary costs. We have to get this done. So I think Congress will put this to the side, will say this is not in the normal budgetary debate or discussion, and we're going to do what needs to be done. Again, there is unity in this country, in the Congress, and among the people of our country. Just as after Pearl Harbor, we stood together and fought a common enemy, that's what we're going to do at this time.
Looking back on your congressional tenure, perhaps the only parallel would be the Persian Gulf War. Can you compare the tone of the times then and the rhetoric then to today? Is there any substantive difference, or do you see it as very similar?
Well, I think it is different. I think the amount of unity from the outset is greater. We had a real discussion and a legitimate debate before the Persian Gulf War. There were those of us who were willing to use force, but we didn't think that was the right time to go at it. And we wanted to use diplomatic measures to try to achieve the end. So there was a difference of opinion. After we voted and the Congress decided to use force, there was absolutely no dissent. We stood shoulder to shoulder. But that's where we are now at the outset. There is no real criticism of moving forward, of finding the people who perpetrated this, trying to prevent it from ever happening again, and finding and bringing to justice the people who perpetrated this atrocity.
The House Minority Leader is Richard Gephardt. Thank you very much for sharing some time with us this morning.
Thank you.
Paula.
All right, Miles, I'm back here in New York City, and joining me now is Pat Probert, that is, who is joining us from Toronto this morning. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Pat, this is one of the more bizarre stories I've heard to come out of this. Explain to us your, in any way, attachment to this World Trade Center disaster. I understand you got a very strange email?
No, it was actually a call on my pager last night at 10:12 p.m. I went to bed about 9:45, listening to some of the news, and kind of fell asleep, and about 10:30 turned my TV off, and then heard my pager going off, and thought it was my brother Joe calling from Vancouver, as he did the night before at home, and I thought maybe instead of him calling tonight, being last night, he may have just paged me to call him back the next day. I called in, I heard this message, and it says, you know, we're under the rubble, we are okay, and it went on and then just ended. And I tried to go back to sleep, couldn't sleep. I got up, I listened to it 2-3 more times, tried to sleep again, I couldn't. I phoned the police. I waited for them to answer their phones. I guess they were busy. I didn't call on the 911 line. So I hung up and went back to sleep. I still couldn't sleep, and I listened to it again. I phoned the Metro Toronto Police, got through to them, spoke to a sergeant at headquarters. He listened to it, others listened to it. They sent police officers to my home last night to hear the tape, and they reviewed it. And he was on the line immediately with AT&T in the United States to try and track the phone number that came back to my pager last night, and you know, it was obviously very, very distressful and very, very sad and disturbing. It's been a long, long night for me.
I can't even begin to understand what that must have been like. Pat, for our viewers to get a better sense of why this was so disturbing, I think we're able now to play part of that message that was transmitted to you. Let's listen.
The first crop crumbled up, but we're still alive. There's no crop crumbled up, but we're still alive. There's no.
Pat, about the only thing I could make out, because the sound was a little distorted, is I'm still alive, I'm still alive.
Yes, we are trapped under the rebel, and then he goes to we are still alive, and then goes on from that point. He sounded very calm, cool, collected, didn't sound like he was stressed. You know, kind of seems like maybe he's in a good protected area and a void in there, but there's definitely, because he changed it from to we, that there's more than one person in here, and obviously they are alive, and hopefully they can, you know, try and track this down through AT&T and find out who it was, or if somebody in the United States hears that voice, maybe it's one of their loved ones hears it and knows that that's his voice, that maybe they can get a cell phone and try calling him. We're really hoping.
That is absolutely amazing. Now, do you have any idea how your pager would have been run?
Well, Toronto,
how this number, you know, would have been accessible to somebody, or is it a common number that someone could have dialed?
Yeah, Toronto has a 416 area code. New York has 516. Upstate New York has 716. And the last four digits of my number is all the same. And it's a very easy first three numbers of it as well. I do business in New York, in New Jersey, around the world, and you know, I don't know, there's a lot of Canadians down there. I don't know if somebody was actually had my number, or if a business associate had called me on my pager and hit redial, as you know, somebody here might have suggested or something, or they just dialed at random last night. But you know, in speaking with the police and everything, and they're people that heard this.
All right, we've lost our signal with Pat. What an absolutely disturbing story. And Miles, I think it's important to point out that one of the heads of the fire chiefs organizations that represents firefighters from all over the country told me yesterday that typically that 90% of the rescues that are done in these kinds of crisis situations, of course nothing compares to the magnitude of this, but most of the folks who are rescued alive are found within the first 24 hours. I am about to interview Mayor Giuliani, but I have been told by 2 or 3 rescue workers that they have not been given up hope. And if Pat Probert, if what he says, or we're led to believe from that exchange on the pager, is true, maybe indeed there are many people who are trapped inside these are what we're hoping to be safe pockets under this debris.
It's a chilling thought, and at the same time a somewhat, I guess, encouraging thought, isn't it?
Yeah, we hope.
All right.
We won't know for a while.
We'll check in with you in a little bit. Paul Lazan in New York. Just a quick little bookkeeping note for our viewers. 10 o'clock Eastern Time, an hour and a half from now, the Transportation Secretary, Norman Mineta, will be holding a news conference to officially announce what we reported to you just a little while ago, that essentially the nation's airspace will be reopened after an unprecedented 2-day shutdown at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. This will obviously be a gradual reopening. You need to be checking with your airline before you make any moves toward the airport. And even if you have a flight that is operating, allow yourself plenty of time for several additional layers of security measures which have been added on in the wake of this unprecedented attack. One other little note for you. The Pentagon today, we're still trying to assess the damage and the loss there. The indications we have right now, despite some high numbers which came out yesterday, are that approximately 100 to 150 people are unaccounted for in the wake of the 757, American Airlines 77, crashing at the edge of one of the so-called wedges there. We're told that the bodies, as is the custom and the procedure in the military, will be airlifted fairly shortly to the Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where the military handles processing of remains of military personnel. We'll be watching that as well. At the White House, Kelly Wallace is on the North Lawn, giving us a sense of what the president is up to today. Obviously, more consultations with the national security team, more consideration of the options that lie ahead. Some of them grim options, right, Kelly?
Well, certainly this whole situation very grim and very difficult for this administration, Miles. What we are seeing the president and his top team do, though, is try to build, in their words, an international coalition against terrorism. And that is to continue today. Mr. Bush in the Oval Office shortly after 7 a.m., getting his normal national security and intelligence briefings. And then aides say, telling us that the president expected to be telephoning other world leaders and also to be talking to local officials in some of the areas affected, including certainly New York City. We know the President, Miles, was on the phone yesterday calling the leaders of Britain and France and Germany, Russia and China. And what you are seeing is this White House trying to get some international backing, potentially for whatever response this U.S. administration might decide to take, but even broader, an international backing for perhaps a worldwide fight against terrorism. We know the White House, Miles, was quite gratified by that statement coming out of NATO on Wednesday, that statement saying that an attack on one member of the alliance is the same as an attack on the entire alliance. And of course, in your interview with Congressman Gephardt, we certainly know this administration, White House officials have been talking with U.S. lawmakers, trying to work on the language of a possible congressional resolution which would allow or give the authority for the U.S. to retaliate for these deadly terrorist attacks. We also know, Miles, certainly that the White House continuing to talk to lawmakers about an emergency spending bill, as much as $20 billion to go ahead and pay for search and rescue efforts, as well as the investigation and the rebuilding efforts in the cities involved. So potentially other meetings with congressional leaders. President working the phones, though, again, trying to build international support. U.S. officials, Miles, as you certainly very well know, publicly not at all speculating or talking about any response this White House might take or when that response could come. Privately, though, some U.S. officials telling CNN that the administration in the president's national security meetings yesterday at least beginning discussion of possible U.S. responses, possible steps the administration could take. Miles, back to you.
Well, Kelly, before you get away, they don't call it the World Trade Center for nothing. There are reports this morning that 100 British nationals, 75 Australians, 100 Japanese nationals, 27 Koreans, we could go down the list,
absolutely,
are missing in the wake of these attacks. And I presume that makes it a little easier to build this coalition.
It certainly does. I mean, when you do see these other countries involved losing citizens from those countries, it does make it easier. Obviously, you have heard world leader after world leader come out and condemn the violence and the terrorism, saying that that country is standing directly side by side with the U.S. You've heard the Prime Minister of Great Britain. You've had the Australian Prime Minister, who happened to be in Washington, I believe, earlier in the week, coming out on the floor at the Capitol, pledging to cooperate and work with the U.S. So that does make it easier. And again, one question we've been asking U.S. officials is, does the U.S., is it looking for any kind of tangible support, actual military support, perhaps from other nations, when and if the U.S. decides to retaliate? U.S. officials publicly and really even privately not sort of speculating about that. But clearly you are seeing this White House trying to build some coalition, some backing for any steps it takes in the immediate future, and then maybe for a long-term fight again against terrorism. Miles?
Well, and certainly there would be a tremendous amount of symbolism should it be, for example, a NATO attack when and if that were to occur. But you get the sense that given the drama here and given the extent of the casualties, that really all bets are off in a sense. There are no constraints really as far as potential reprisals. The White House doesn't need to be bridled in any way. Do you get that sense there?
Well, certainly, and I thought your interview with Congressman Gephardt quite telling, how he sort of, you asked him that great question, I thought, about the comparison with the 1991 situation, Congress having to come forward, deciding on a resolution to give Mr. Bush's father the go-ahead for using force against Iraq when the Iraqis invaded Kuwait. Congressman Gephardt saying there's really no division here, no controversy here. Democrats, Republicans united, definitely standing together. Obviously, there is pressure on the administration to respond. You've been reporting the American people very, very angry. But, Miles, this administration, wants to certainly get the facts, get a case together, make sure it gets the right people. also make sure whatever steps it takes, it can sort of knock out that organization or organizations or whatever it is so that those groups can't attack again. And then there is this sort of longer concern to try to somehow convey to the American people that the White House, the administration, that these organizations have taken steps so that something like this could never happen again. That's obviously the big hurdle for this White House.
Kelly, what about the timing, though? Is there a sense that there is a window of opportunity that is open now for a reprisal, and at a certain point in time it becomes too late to do that? In other words, the coalition might become frayed at the edges?
Well, that's a good question. You have heard a lot of people talking about the tremendous anger on the streets of New York City, certainly in Washington, all around the country. Anger for retaliation, for the administration to do something, to a show of force, really, because of the magnitude of the destruction and the tragedy. So there seems to be certainly growing pressure for the administration to act quickly. You get the sense that the president, he is certainly known as a decisive leader who certainly wants to, once he makes a decision, go forward and go forward quickly. But at the same time, if you look at the language the president has used, the Secretary of Defense, they sort of make the case that this can be a maybe sustained or prolonged battle. The president saying that the battle will take time and resolve, but in the end, we will win. So you get the sense that while there's pressure to act quickly, and while maybe the U.S. could be planning to act quickly, that as well U.S. leaders kind of making the case in the U.S. for a maybe longer-term battle, again, against terrorism around the world.
CNN's Kelly Wallace at the White House, keeping us posted. We will, of course, be checking in with her as our continuing coverage presses on. We're now approaching the 48-hour mark since that first attack on the first tower of the World Trade Center. In about an hour and 20 minutes' time, we should be hearing from the Secretary of Transportation to confirm what we have been reporting this morning, that at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, the nation's air traffic system will resume operations, albeit gradually, albeit somewhat constrained, but nevertheless, at 11 a.m., the skies will be reopened after an unprecedented, nearly 48-hour closure of airspace over the United States. Let's send it back to Paula in New York.
And Miles, you just mentioned that 48-hour mark. At this point, it is beginning to look like a more typical workday here in New York City. We're going to show you a shot now of what the area continues to look like downtown, where smoke is still billowing from what is left of the World Trade Center bombing. I might have mentioned earlier the winds have shifted, so a lot of New Yorkers who never smelled this stuff before are smelling it this morning. It's a stinging, acrid smoke. Rescuers working against the clock here, trying to dig through tons and tons of rubble. And in fact, in one of the most astonishing stories we've heard here today, there seems to be an indication there are people still trapped inside this rubble. A man named Pat Probert, who just joined us from Toronto, explained that last night he got a page on his pager. He punched in his codes, went to listen to the message. It was a message from someone trapped inside the rubble, someone saying, first of all, I am alive, and then indicating we are alive. Pat Probert was so shattered by what he heard, he listened to the message over and over again, called authorities in Toronto, who then engaged some U.S. authorities. They're investigating this call. They're trying to get AT&T to try to do some work to track down the number of who was calling them, to perhaps try to figure out the identity of that caller. So that is a bit of encouraging news, even though 12 hours has passed since that page. The mayor of New York City saying that these rescue workers are going to stay in these incredibly challenging situations for many days to come, and in hopes of getting to these folks. We should mention yesterday that it is quite miraculous that these search and rescue teams actually got to 11 people, 6 firefighters, 3 police officers, 2 civilians. And rescued them from the rubble. You were looking at the area around a building called One Liberty Plaza, familiar to New Yorkers here. It actually houses NASDAQ's new headquarters. You know, you got to understand, because no one can really get into this area, it's very hard to accurately report what's going on. But for a large part of yesterday, most journalists were reporting that this 54-story building was in danger of collapsing. The mayor confirming today it did not collapse. It was not a secondary collapse. Those are his exact words. The management of the building saying that the building has not sustained any structural damage, and there are no issues with the building at the current time, which is good news. However, there are 100 buildings in the area surrounding this that are in not very good shape. The mayor confirming this morning that the Millennium Hotel, some of you who visited New York may know that hotel. He reiterated something to clarify this. Millennium Hotel is okay. There might be another hotel that is in greater danger of having some problems. Just a quick recap of what New Yorkers are dealing with this morning. New York public schools are open, parochial schools open for the most part. The public schools did open late today to give teachers and counselors a time to sit down and figure out what they are going to tell students about this attack here in New York City. The major exchanges may open as early as tomorrow. If that doesn't happen, they will open on Monday. And the reason why it's difficult to get these businesses open south of 14th Street is that it is very difficult to get south of here. There's a street called the West Side Highway that has been set up as a staging area for all these search and rescue teams that are coming to town to assist in these efforts. The mayor is saying this morning that they hope to open up some of these corridors heading south to Wall Street in anticipation of the exchanges opening again tomorrow. Once again, the numbers continue to be disturbing. The medical examiner of New York City saying they now have 500 body bags on hand, that they have ordered at least 5,000 more that are on the way. We can tell you this morning, and we can confirm this now because the mayor's confirming it, 300 firefighters missing, 30 police officers missing, and about 30 Port Authority police officers missing. And Miles, the most disturbing statistic of all, and this is the first time the mayor has been saying this, is that 3,700 people are known to be missing.
All right, thank you very much, Paula. We're going to turn it over to Staten Island, New York, not far from where Paula is standing right now. CNN's Hillary Lane is there with some information on the phone with us from there, some information about what is going on there. Hillary?
Good morning. What is happening here is that they have shut down Staten Island. Port Authority police are telling us this morning there is no way anyone will get on the island, and they are not allowing cars off the island at this point. From New York or New Jersey, there are about 4 entrances to Staten Island, which is one of the 5 New York City boroughs. All of those bridges have been closed at this point. The Staten Island Ferry, which ran from downtown Manhattan, obviously is not in service as well. They will not confirm what is going on Staten Island at this point. They said they are moving emergency personnel in, conducting some sort of an investigation, but Police Officer Hughes of the Port Authority Police will not tell us why. He's only saying that Staten Island has been shut down at this point. Back to you.
Hillary, just to confirm, Staten Island has been the site of a repository for much of the rubble from the collapse of the World Trade Center. Is there some linkage there?
I cannot tell you this at this point. The only thing they're telling us is that they're moving emergency personnel in. There was a good deal of police activity at the Outer Bridge crossings where we tried to enter from the southern tip. Our producer, Vito Maggiolo, is trying to make it in from the Goethals Bridge from the New Jersey side. He has been shut off as well and says it does not look like they are letting anybody off. Earlier today, he thought there was one lane of one bridge open and that they were letting cars go by, but apparently that has been stopped as well.
And have you been told to evacuate the area or just stay put then, Hillary?
We were not allowed to go onto the island at all. They were moving all cars out of the way, so they said they could move in police personnel from the New Jersey police and from the Port Authority police. But like I said, nobody is allowed to go onto Staten Island at this point, and it does not appear like they're letting anybody exit the island as well.
Hillary and Miles, I'd love to jump in here because this brings to mind something that happened during the 10 o'clock hour of our broadcast last night when we were told the Empire State Building was being evacuated and Penn Station was being evacuated. It turns out there was nothing to whatever threats were made there. So, Hillary, I guess one of the things we're going to have to continue to live with perhaps is fake threats in some of these areas. I know we don't know enough at this point to say that. I just wanted to interject that because it I think was scary
right.
for a number of us last night.
I think it's a case of, take every precaution at this point. Don't let anything go by. And in the case of a borough like Staten Island, which is accessible only by bridge, at this point, it is a very easy area to cordon off should that be the case. And so I think police have moved in this morning, working on whatever information they are, and taking every precaution that they can. And in this case, they are able to block off, to entirely cordon off the island.
Okay, Miles, I don't know if you want to carry on here.
All right, thank you very much, Paula. As a matter of fact, we're going to keep it in New York. Let's move along to the hospitals, a scene of a real wrenching emotion as medical personnel try to care for tremendous numbers of severely wounded people. Brian Palmer has been at St. Vincent's Hospital, along with the fatigued staff there, trying to keep us updated. What do you know, Brian?
Exactly. Well, we've seen a trickle of ambulances arrive here at St. Vincent's Hospital Medical Center. Actually, under a dozen volunteer. There's a volunteer police officer who was just treated, and emergency services vehicle going back past. This is one of the main arteries south to the blast site. But Paula said before, a largely typical scene in New York, but that's largely above 14th Street. Below 14th Street, where we are, there's a state of emergency. The streets have been shut down to anything other than authorized vehicles, emergency services vehicles, which is kind of eerie. This is one of the most vibrant parts of New York, with New York University and the Parsons School of Design in Greenwich Village and the legendary jazz clubs. People are waking up, but the scene is a bit subdued. Now, here at St. Vincent's, they had set up a treatment area outside of the hospital. They've actually taken that down and moved things back inside, as sort of a sign that things are returning to normalcy, but also a sign that they're not receiving the numbers that they expected. Miles?
Brian, if you would you mind sort of taking off the electronic blinders, if you will, and pan the camera around so we can sort of set the scene? You sort of referred to it, and just describe what you're seeing there as you stand in the midst of all of this.
Well, what we're seeing now outside of St. Vincent's is really a press vigil, but we've also seen some family members who've come by to talk to the press, family members of people who are still missing. But you see a scrum of just press waiting for the latest information from St. Vincent's spokespeople. They were holding regularly scheduled press conferences, but what they've told us now is that they're going to speak to us when they have new information. What they have told us is that they're going to try and set up a website which would have patient names. The catch there is that they need to get the permission from all these patients, over 400 patients, before they can post that. But they're working in cooperation with the city's Office of Emergency Management to do that.
Brian, we've heard these tragic stories about family members looking for missing relatives who might or might not be in hospitals, might or might not be identified. How many of those have you seen? Are there quite a few in numbers?
Well, we haven't seen too many of those here yet. We've been here about 2 or 3 hours, but we have seen some people here who have actually taken their case directly to the media, and they're talking to people here and trying to get their stories out, Miles.
CNN's Brian Palmer maintaining a vigil at St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan. Let's go back to Paula.
You know, Miles, I'd love to stay with you for a second. The one thing that none of us has addressed, I think because the markets continue to be closed, is what the impact of this horrible tragedy is going to have on markets. You know, we know all the major brokerage houses are closed. We don't know, how that's going to affect people's individual accounts. And right now I'm going to check in with a man, Michael Farr, who I think can give us all a better sense of what broader picture of what impact this might all have on the fleet economy. Mr. Michael Farr, thank you so much for joining us today. Sure. Let me see if I have this correct. You're with Farr, Miller & Washington. What is that?
We're a money management firm here in Washington, D.C. We manage individual accounts and institutional accounts.
All right. I think almost everyone that we have talked to or seen as quoted would acknowledge that this is going to certainly add instability to an already weakening economy. How much instability?
Well, that's the big question. We really don't know. We do know that Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan has said that he and the Federal Reserve are at the ready to supply whatever liquidity is necessary to maintain order and stability in the financial markets. We've also seen G7 leaders come up with the same pledge of liquidity, and in fact a great deal of liquidity was applied yesterday. So When we have seen periods like this in our nation's history of catastrophe, including Pearl Harbor, including the attack in 1993 at the World Trade Center, Desert Storm and the Gulf War, there is a period of instability, and then some 6 months later, on average, we see markets trading higher by about 11%, and 12 months out, markets are some 18% higher. The American markets are some of the of course, best and finest in the world, largest in the world, and bringing them back to order so that we can begin to get back to some sort of business again will happen. This time, amount of time that it takes to happen is really what's in question. And I think, you know, so much of the infrastructure of the markets at the various firms and World Trade Center, so many of our friends, Wall Street's a place of relationships. And we all know people that were there, and we're grieving for them. We're all walking around a little bit numb, knowing how important and vital it is that we get back to the business of America's business.
Michael, you brought up a couple of those other crises. How critical or how relevant is it that this is the first crisis, other than the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, that has happened in the financial heart of a city?
Well, I think that it is certainly significant, again, because Wall Street is a place of relationships. Business is done still just by a person's word, frequently over the telephone, based on relationships that we've built. Now, the data, the real backbone of what happened in the World Trade Center in terms of records and papers and that sort of thing, are all held in off-site, or replicated in off-site storage centers, data storage centers away from Manhattan. So the skeleton and the architecture of the markets is still there, ready to come back in place. The minds, the experience, the expertise, the brilliance that was housed in those buildings, the relationships that were so essential to getting business done, have tragically been lost, and we need to rebuild ways to add some meat back on the infrastructure to get business resumed on Wall Street.
Michael, need a real brief answer to this one. We're talking, there's talk that a spending bill of some $20 billion will end up at the president's desk sometime today. Is that drop in a bucket, or is that something that also, at a time when people are worried about Social Security and some of the budget resolutions, might also have an impact on the economy?
I think that certainly it's a drop in the bucket, but it's an indicator of the support that's at the ready, and it won't be the last bit of support at the ready. I think that everyone's focused, everyone is joining together to get back to some normalcy and to make sure that America shows its resolve to move forward from this sort of great disaster. Though our hearts are certainly heavy, we forge ahead.
Okay, Michael Farr, thanks for your insights this morning. Back to Atlanta now, and Miles.
Thank you very much, Paula. In New York, after all, they invented the ticker tape parade. This is a city that is used to cheering on what it deems to be heroes. Through all of this terrible tragedy, a new kind of hero has emerged, and Jeannie Mose tells us about that.
We've seen the bad news over and over, from above, from below.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
The doctor holding this camera did live, and now New Yorkers are saying we will survive. Guys driving bulldozers are getting the red carpet treatment.
Thank you!
New Yorkers, who sometimes treat camouflage as a fashion statement, are cheering the military.
Thank you, guys!
I was so touched when I first came around the corner and saw what was happening. I kept having to fight back tears.
I've been mesmerized by watching this on TV, and I wanted to come out and show my support.
This woman used to have a view of the Twin Towers from her apartment. Now the skyline has too much sky.
It reminds me of when somebody loses their two front teeth or something, and there's this void, and you feel like something should be there, but it's not.
I woke up this morning and I made this t-shirt, and I thought, that's just not enough. What else can I do?
Luke Littell ended up making a big thank you sign. Soon others joined in. Firemen tend to be favorites. But folks even cheered Con Ed, a utility.
Probably the only time that we'll ever see Con Ed trucks applauded.
The crowd applauded trucks full of debris and ash.
You see these flowers?
Yep.
That's for every truck that goes by that has ashes in it, because in those ashes is someone's family's family.
Some folks choked back tears. Others vented their anger.
I'm mad. That's what I am. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Mr. Bush, put the bombers up in the air. Get him. Just get him. Get him. Get him. Get him.
Some would like to get the towers rebuilt.
You can hurt us, you can keep us down, but you can't keep us down forever. And I think the rebuild would be a symbol to the world that the human spirit is alive and well here.
The spirits of those involved in the rescue effort seemed raised by the reception.
I think the people are great.
A moving reception for those who move the earth. Jeannie Moe, CNN, New York.
All right, remarkable scenes of contrast in New York City in the wake of this terrible tragedy. Let's take a look at some live pictures. Baltimore Harbor, I believe, is the place we are moving to. This is the U.S. Naval Hospital ship Comfort. You're seeing a very close shot of it. There's the radar tower, the conning tower of this particular ship. It is in this harbor to bring supplies to aid and help in the recovery